to our panelists. Thank you.
So it's really, really nice to actually get out of the negotiations and come to the types of places where change is really happening, which is in universities, in our communities, with young people all around the world. So again, my name's Jamie Henn from the United States, most recently kind of based in California, and I was one of the co-founders of 350.org, which has emerged as this international climate change campaign. We started about 5 years ago with 7 friends who were in university together, and we were all kind of college activists trying to change the world. We would do little events on campus, we'd work on fair trade issues, we'd work on wage campaigns for workers on campus, and then finally, about 2 years in, we took this class on climate change. And none of us had really been involved in environmental issues before, but we had this 1-month class taught by a professor that introduced what a crisis climate change was, and the fact that people weren't doing much about it, that we had all the science that we needed, we had a lot of policies, politicians were debating it, but there was no real movement of people to push this issue. That the traditional environmental community had been working on it, but there wasn't really a climate movement or a climate justice movement. This was back in around 2005. And so we said, wow, this is a huge problem. It's also a huge creative challenge. And it seems like something that would be really fun to try and figure out. How can we motivate people to care about an issue which often seems really far away, that seems like it's disconnected from our lives, that seems like it is a problem for the future? So we got to work trying to do big bike rides and throw parties in the dark so people turn off all the lights and save electricity and do other things like that. And as we were graduating, we connected with a writer named Bill McKibben, who is a US environmental writer who wrote one of the first books on global warming back in 1989. And we decided that we'd try and run a national campaign around the United States on climate change. And so we gave ourselves 10 weeks, and we just emailed everybody we could possibly think of, and got a lot of help from organizations, and ended up having 1,400 events in all 50 states around the United States. They were offline events, so people went out in their communities, or they skied down glaciers, or they dove underwater, but we were able to connect them back together online, just people emailing photos into Flickr and sharing them there. And it got tremendous media coverage. People had never really seen this type of creative action before. So we were on the front page of CNN in the United States and Google News and all of that. That's kind of the model we've taken forward ever since. In 2009, 350.org was kind of born, and we organized our first global day of action on climate change. And we gave people a very easy template, which was, we want you to be creative. We want you to have fun. We want you to do something meaningful. We're not going to tell you everything that you need to do, but let's take one day and see if around the world we can try and inject one idea into the public consciousness and to our political leaders. And it's a number. It's this number 350, which stands for what scientists say is the safe upper limit of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, so 350 parts per million. Right now we're at about 400 parts per million, which is why we're beginning to see these impacts of climate change around the world. So scientists say we need to really, instead of course, pouring more pollution in the atmosphere, get it back down. So 350 was kind of this strange, wonky, complicated scientific principle, but it was also just 3 numbers. And it was something that no matter what language people spoke, they could see those 3 numbers and say, okay, this is something about climate change. This is something about building a movement, something about having a unified goal that we can all work towards. So that day on October 24th, 2009, we ended up having 5,200 events in over 180 countries around the world. Kelly, Wael, others were really helpful in making it possible. And the amazing thing was, the biggest events, the ones that were often the most successful or the most meaningful, they weren't organized by organizations. They weren't organized by big NGOs. They were organized by everyday people who saw that there was an opportunity to do something creative in their community and applied their own skills to create change. So our largest rally on that day was organized by 2 sisters who are in Ethiopia. They're in Addis Ababa, and they went to every school in their city, and they convinced the professors, and then they convinced the principals, the leaders of the school, to let out the school children on this day and come be part of a march on climate change. And they had 10,000 people in the streets marching for climate action. And those were the images that we were able to then get to the media and help kind of create this sense that there was work happening. But when we think about activism, we often do think about big demonstrations like that, right? You know, to make change, we have to have thousands of people marching through the streets of Warsaw. I think that we forget the power of also of individual action and of iconic action and of how we tell stories. So our smallest event on that day back in 2009 was one young woman in Iraq who posted on Facebook a few days earlier, I really want to be part of this global event on climate change, but I'm afraid of hosting a public demonstration because this is 2009 in Iraq, the situation is really tense, and she got comments from people around the world saying, don't worry if it's small. You know, don't worry if you can't get a big crowd. If you can just take a picture and send us a message, you know, it would mean so much to us to know that there's someone there. And so she did. She went out on that day and held a small 350 banner, just one person. And yet that was the photograph of her holding that banner that got the most likes on Facebook, the most shares, the most people writing in saying, this is the type of individual heroism and courage and commitment that inspires me to take action. Forget the big crowds. It's the individual action that inspires me to do something different. So where are we now? Where is this movement now? And I should wrap up soon, probably. We're beginning, I think, to figure out how we use all of our creativity, how we use these distributed networks, how we use this new technology to go after a problem which is all about centralized power. The biggest block to climate action is the fossil fuel industry. These are the companies and corporations that have a stranglehold over our governments, and the reason why in the stadium across the river, we don't see progress. Because these companies are controlling many of our countries, many of our democracies, and they don't want to see change. That's a centralized problem. And the way to get after that, the way to begin to challenge their political power, I think, is to build a type of distributed movement. Not just all of us running in one direction together, but working more like a swarm of bees. You know, each of us can kind of sting from different sides. We can flock together when need be. We can fall apart and move in directions when we have to. We need to be a bit more like the world that we want to create. Instead of one big coal plant, we want distributed solar panels. Instead of one campaign, we need many campaigns that work together and are interconnected and create power together. So what we've learned at 350 in doing this work is that activism really is an act of creation. It's an act of creativity. And we need more creative minds in this movement. Policy is important, learning the information is important, following these processes are important, but we need more poets, we need more artists, we need more musicians, video makers. So if you're looking at this and you have a skill that you think you want to bring, and maybe, you know, science isn't your thing or economics, maybe it is. If it is, it's great. But if you have a creative skill that you can bring to this movement and you can share with people and you can figure out ways to use that to convince other people to take action, that's the most important thing from our perspective. So I'm vaguely optimistic, actually, about the next couple years. I think that we're beginning to figure out how we can build a movement around the world, how we can connect with each other to take action, and how we can begin to challenge these traditional, centralized systems that we really need to take on for progress. So it's really fun to be with you all. I'm excited to hear what other people have to say. We'll see what comes out of the next couple days in Warsaw, but have no fear. This movement is definitely growing and continuing, and it'll be really, really interesting to see where it goes over the coming months and years. Thanks a lot.